Welcome adventurers to another online adventure award presentation brought to you by the Southern New England Conference. My name is Jennifer Hay and I'm the director of the His Branches Adventurer Club. I have 3 children, the youngest of which just completed the Helping Hands class. Today I'm going to be presenting to you the Baking Award, so let's get started. When you're baking or doing anything in the kitchen, I think you're going to know the answer to this question, but what is the first thing that you need to do? Right, wash your hands. So let's do that. Here are some of the utensils you're going to need today. You need a bowl, a large bowl, and a regular size bowl. Or, I'll be using measuring cups instead of the smaller bowl. You'll also need these types of measuring cups for your dry ingredients, measuring spoons, you'll need a spatula and a knife. Also, you're going to need a baking dish and probably some baking spray. Now I'm going to tell you the ingredients that you need to have on hand for us to bake. You're going to need flour, you're going to need some sugar, you're going to need your yeast, salt, oil, and then you'll need warm water, about 110 to 115 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer, you just want to be able to put your hand in the water and it feels nice and hot. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes now, so turn off your video and go collect your supplies and bring them in front of you. Once you have them, resume the video and we'll measure out the ingredients together. Now that you have your ingredients in front of you, let's go ahead and start measuring things out. The first thing I want to do is to proof the yeast, which means that you're going to add your yeast to the warm water and let it sit while you continue to measure out your other ingredients. The reason you do this is to make sure that your yeast is active and alive so that your bread will rise. We're also going to add our sugar to the water that the yeast is going to prove in. And this will allow something for the yeast to feed on and it will grow better. So we're going to take a tablespoon of sugar, and this is why I told you to take a knife. When you're measuring things, whether it's your flour or your sugar, it's always good to take the straight edge of the knife and level it off so you know that you have the right amount. If you were to use this side, you could actually gouge it out and you would have less than a tablespoon. So that's why you always want to use the flat edge of your knife. But you can mound it up and keep it over your container, flatten it off, and then put it into your measuring cup or bowl that you're going to put your hot water in. I'm going to test the water temperature. You can see this says it's 116 degrees, which is a little bit hotter than we want. So I'm going to adjust it to try to get the temperature we like. The reason this is important is because, again, yeast is alive. So if you make the water too hot, you could actually kill the yeast. So this is 112 degrees. That's perfect. I'm going to fill my quarter cup. I'm going to put it in. And then I'm going to get my half a tablespoon of water and add it in. Now we're going to add half a tablespoon of yeast to the water and sugar mixture that we just created. I'm not using a knife on this just because the bag is small, but I kind of shook it to make it flat. If it's a little bit over like this, it's going to be okay. You just don't want a big mound above there. So I'm going to pour it in. I'm going to give it a gentle stir like this. And then I'm going to try to get the yeast off. Now we're going to set this aside while we measure out our other ingredients. You'll know that your yeast is active if it becomes frothy and bubbly, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a few minutes. I didn't mention it earlier, but I just wanted to say now that we're making a partial batch of this quick bread roll recipe. This recipe that we're doing today is going to make 3 bread rolls. The actual full recipe makes 12, but I figure this will be an easier amount to handle for our adventurers and me. So just know that what we're doing today is 1/4 of the actual size. Okay, let's measure our flour. For this partial recipe that we're doing, we're going to be using 3/4 cups of flour plus 2 tablespoons. So this is a 1/2 cup size. I'm going to put my flour in. I'm going to take my knife. I'm going to take the flat edge. I'm going to run it across the top and make a nice level. Give it a tap. Make sure the flour comes out. And I said we needed 3/4 cups, so that was a 1/2. This is 1/4. So again, I'm going to scoop the flour and take my knife, flatten it off, put it in. So this is my 3/4 cups of flour. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tablespoon measure. It said 3/4 cups plus 2 tablespoons of flour. It's always a good idea to leave out a little bit of flour so that you can either add it in if you need it, or if the dough seems proper, then you don't have to add it in. So I'm going to put my 2 tablespoons of flour. As you see, my container has an edge on it, so it's the same principle as using the flat edge of the knife, but I'm running it along the flat edge to make a nice flat spoonful. I'm going to put it in to my 1/2 cup measure, so if I need to add more flour, then I'll have it readily available. Next, let's measure out our salt, which is going to be 1/4 teaspoon. It's always very important that you look at your measuring cups, measuring spoons, that you're picking out the right size. So this one says 1/4 teaspoon. So I'm going to open my salt. I'm going to take the salt. I'll use my knife again, the back edge. Make sure I have a nice flat 1/4 teaspoon, and I'm going to put it in with the flour. And then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stir to mix the flour and the salt together. After I have mixed the salt and the flour together, I'm actually going to make a little well or a space in the center of my flour. And this is where I'll be pouring my water and yeast and sugar mixture. Wow, look at our yeast, water, and sugar mixture. Look how bubbly and frothy it is. This yeast is good. So we know that our bread is going to rise. Now let's pour the yeast mixture into our bowl with the flour. I'm using my spatula, which I have heard called a money saver for another name, because when you use your spatula, you scrape down the sides of your container and you don't waste anything, so you save money. So I'm using the spatula to clean out the sugar, yeast, and water. And now I'm going to measure in the oil, which we needed 1.5 tablespoons of oil. So I'm going to use my 1 tablespoon measuring spoon and put that in. Now I'm going to get my 1/2 tablespoon. Pour it in. And now we're going to mix this up. So I'm going to start with using a wooden spoon just to get everything initially mixed together. Typically, when you're making bread, you're going to end up using your hand. Unless you have a mixer, a stand mixer, then you will most likely use your hand. And it's actually a very good thing because you get to learn what the dough should feel like. Now, if you remember, I had some extra flour, but it looks like to me that this might be enough. One trick I'll tell you, you see how there's some sticky dough left on the spoon. You can sprinkle a little flour on here and then just slide your thumb or your finger and all of that will come off your spoon and go back into your bread. Again, money saving. Here is where you get to use your hand. We're going to mix this in the bowl with our hand and see how it feels, and then we're going to turn it out onto the counter. So you're going to initially finish mixing it up with your hand. And this, you want something that feels nice and soft, not too sticky. If it's very sticky, it means that you don't have enough water. You have too much water. And you're going to need to add some more flour. But this dough, I think, is going to be okay. So I'm just scraping the sides and getting up the last bits of things into my dough. And now I think I'm ready to turn this out onto the surface. Now we're going to turn our dough onto the counter. If you have one of these, this is called it's a silicone mat. I did clean the counter very well. It would be fine to use just a counter, but I have these and I like to use them. Before you put your dough onto the counter or your mat, you should always add a little bit of flour, sprinkle it on, and then you put your dough onto your surface. When you're kneading, you're going to use this part of your hand to push, and then you're going to pick it up and turn it and push again. Fold it, push it, fold it, push it. So you're going to do this for about 5 minutes. And if your dough gets, as you are kneading it, seems like it's getting too sticky, you can always put a little bit more flour on your surface. But again, if your dough feels nice and soft, you don't want to add too much flour because then your bread will get dry and it won't be as moist and flaky. So we're going to again push with the heel of your hand, pick it up, push, pick it up, kind of fold it, push. Kneading the dough helps create what's called gluten, and that gives your bread a really nice texture. If you don't knead long enough, then your bread is not going to be nice and light and fluffy. So the gluten helps the bread to have a nice consistency. And again, if it gets a little bit too sticky, you can always just spread out your flour, sprinkle a little bit more on there, but just keep it very little bits amount that you're adding because this is already a nice dough. So again, do this for about 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, great job. Our dough looks lovely. I hope yours looks nice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to divide this dough into 3 pieces, and then we're going to let it rest for about 10 minutes. Typically when you make bread, your bread loaf that you initially make to put into the pan is going to sit for probably an hour to rise or double in size. This is a quick bed recipe, so we're not going to let it sit that long. We're only going to let it sit for 10 minutes. So when I'm going to divide the dough, if I have a ball like this, I'm going to make it into a log shape. So since I want to divide this into 3, I'm going to take my log and I'm going to basically think about what it would look like in 3 pieces. So you can make your divisions. So you kind of mark it and then you can twist and pinch. If you really want to and you have a scale, you could actually weigh these. I do have a scale, and just for the sake of interest, let's see how much the balls weighed and see how I did with dividing them. As always, make sure your surfaces are clean before you use them. Okay, this first one is 2.8 ounces. Let's see what the second one is. 2.8 ounces, wow. I did pretty well. Let's see what the third one says. 2.6. Well, I'd say that's pretty good division. I'm not going to make any adjustments. If you were to find that, say, one of your dough balls was 2 ounces and the other one was over 3, perhaps you'd want to pinch a little bit off and add it to the other one. But as I said, these are pretty equal, so we're going to leave it as it is. Now we're going to put these onto our baking sheet to sit for 10 minutes. I have this baking sheet right here. I'm going to take some parchment paper, but you don't have to. I just happen to have some and I like to use it, but yeah, you don't have to. If you have it, you can use it. Otherwise, you'll just put it directly onto your baking sheet. I will, however, whether or not you're using parchment paper or a baking sheet, you should spray with a little cooking spray. So now I'm going to put my 3 balls of dough onto the baking sheet and or parchment paper, and we're going to put it in the oven. We're going to let this sit for 10 minutes to let them rise. When you put your bread aside to rise, whether it's these rolls or any bread that you might be baking, it's important that you put it aside in a warm place, free from drafts. You don't necessarily have to cover it. If you do, you want to put a linen cloth, clean linen cloth, over the top. But certainly you want it in a place where it's going to be free from chills or drafts. You have your preheating oven. If you can put it somewhere nearby, it'll have just a little bit of warmth to help it rise. But you don't want to cook it, just needs to be warm and draft free. Now that we have a few minutes while your bread rises, let's go over some of the other items from your baking award. One of the questions is, what is baking? I'd like you to pause your video and write your answers in the comments section. When we come back, I'll give you the definition. Thank you for sharing your answers. I'll now give you the definition. Baking is preparing items by heating them in the oven at the proper temperature. Did you know that baking is a chemical reaction? It sure is. It's changing liquids into solids. It's very important, just like in any chemistry experiment, that you combine the right ingredients in the proper proportions to get the desired result. I mean, sure, you can throw a little bit of this and a lot of that together and say, I'm baking a bread. But unless you use the proper amounts, your bread isn't going to come out like what you think it should. So remember, baking is a chemical process, so you need to use the right amounts and the right ingredients. Another of your requirements was to think about some Bible stories that talks about baking. Here are just a few, and you can find many more. The first one is Genesis 18, verse 16. It says, So Abraham ran back to his tent and said to Sarah, Hurry, get 3 large measures of your best flour, knead it into dough, and bake some bread. Does anyone know what this story is about? If you do, put it in the comments section. Yes, it's the story of the 3 men who were messengers from God who told Abraham that he and Sarah were going to have a child. Our next verse is Genesis 19, verse 3. It says, But Lot insisted, so at last they went home with him. Lot prepared a feast for them, complete with fresh bread, made without yeast, and they ate. Does anyone know what this story is about? Put your answers in the comment section. You are right. It's the story of the angels that came to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Good Good job, guys. Our next verse is Leviticus 2, verse 4. It says, "Now, when you bring an offering of grain offered, baked in an oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil." When it says unleavened, it means bread made without using yeast like we did today. You saw that it frothed up, and it's what makes the bread rise. So these offerings that they were talking about are made without leaven, so they make flatbread or wafers. Our last verse that I'm going to share with you is 2 Samuel 13, verse 8. It says, "So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, and he was lying down. And she took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes." So again, it talks about the kneading process, and she made bread. Now you guys are going to be expert bread bakers as well. Finally, the question is asked to you, who does Jesus say he is in John 6, verse 35? You can put your answers in the comment section. Nice job. The Bible verse says, "And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." Isn't that a wonderful promise? Jesus is the bread of life. Well, here are our rolls ready to go into the oven. It's been 10 minutes, so now let's place them in the oven to bake. Okay, let's get them in the oven. Remember to be extremely careful. The oven is very hot, so perhaps your parents need to help you do this part of it. I'm going to set the timer for it needs to bake for 8 to 10 minutes, so I'm going to set my timer for 7 minutes just to check it ahead of time. I will know that it has to go for possibly another 1 to 3 minutes after I check it. Okay, the timer is going off. It's been 7 minutes. We're going to check it. I'm going to peer through the window first, and let's look inside. They look golden brown. So I'm probably going to leave it for another minute. Okay, the timer is going off. Let's take them out. Remember, this is very, very hot, so please have your parents take it out of the oven for you. Okay, here we go. Wow, those look nice. And always remember to turn the oven off after you're finished. Okay. All right, let's take them off the baking pan and put them on the cooling rack. Again, you should be very careful because this is quite hot. It's important to take them off the baking pan to the cooling rack because, as you know, the baking pan is extremely hot. So the bread will continue to cook if you don't take them off the hot surface. So here are your bread rolls. I hope yours came out so nicely. One thing I would say about these is they'd seem a little bit dark to me, so perhaps we could have done them for a little bit less time, or another option is you can put some aluminum foil over the top to help the tops from getting so dark. However, they've risen nicely and they look beautiful. The bread rolls have cooled and they're ready to be cut into. So let's see how they look. Can you see this? Feels good. Wow, it's perfect. This is now ready for your favorite sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly, veggie burger. I know I'm gonna make some chickpea salad and enjoy my rolls with it. To complete your baking award, you need to bake one more thing. You could make some more bread rolls, or you could try making bread, or you can bake a cake, cookies, cupcakes. I've included one of my favorite fruitcake recipes. It's really easy and really yummy, and it always comes out perfectly. So perhaps you want to give it a try. I've included the recipe in the slides at the end. Again, I've also included the full recipe for the bread rolls that you just made. Additionally, I included some kids baking websites, so check it out and see what else you might be able to bake. All right, I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did too. And I hope you're enjoying the fruits of your labor. And remember again that Jesus is our bread of life. With him, we will never hunger. God bless you. Bye.